Welcome to the Productivity Show, podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan, the COO of Asian Efficiency. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm doing well. For those who listened to last week's episode, hopefully my voice sounds a little more normal this week than last week, but I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, good to see you back in good health. Last week was a bit of a struggle and tug of war, but I'm glad your voice is back to normal. I'm sure people can hear that as well. Today's episode is going to be a fun one. This is something we did, I want to say, about a month ago. So we know many of you who like listening to us love to get productivity tips and strategies, but also want to know what's kind of happening in the space. And so one way to kind of stay on top of what's happening in the productivity industry is to listen to this podcast as well, because we want to share some stuff that's been happening and also share some insights of what's going on and also kind of our thoughts of the current events of what's happening around productivity apps, tools, books, and everything else in between. So aside from the industry news, we're also going to be covering three important topics. The first one is, does it make sense to color code your calendar a week later after everything happened? This is something that one person did, and we were questioning if this is actually a good idea or not. So we're going to be covering that here. Another thing we're going to be talking about is how capitalism and productivity are hurting young people's well-being. And then the third topic is, with more people working from home, do GTD contexts still make sense? So those are things we're going to be covering. You can find links to everything that we share in the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/397. And next week, we're going to be talking about spring cleaning your schedule and workflows. But as always, we like to kick things off with our top three favorite resources. And Brooks, the floor is yours.
All right. So my first resource is a light called the Elgato Key Light Air. And I have two of them on my desk here, shining on me as we speak. And what these are is they're lights that are really designed for people being on camera, streaming and stuff like that. But the cool thing about them is they're Wi-Fi enabled as well, and they work really well with integrations. So for example, it's made by Elgato, the same company who makes the Stream Deck, which we've talked about on the podcast before. And so to turn on my lights, I just hit a button on my Stream Deck and it sets up my lights exactly how I like them and all that sort of thing. So the Elgato Key Light Air is my first tip. My second is not a resource. Well, I guess it kind of is. It's a tip as well. And this is something that I've done at least 5 times, and it's worked really well every single time. And that is getting airline support via Twitter. So, sometimes you have Tan doesn't have this problem because Tan just gets his assistant to do all this stuff. But for the rest of us, when we need to call the airline, we need to get something sorted, we need to change something, you call the airline, it can be like a really long wait. The person may or may not be helpful. A hack that I started doing a couple of years ago, and I just did it a couple of days ago, which is what reminded me of this, is instead of calling in the line, just follow the airline on Twitter and send them a direct message. Don't @reply them because they get a million of those. Send them a direct message and make sure they're able to message you back, and just be really succinct, really friendly, and just say, hey, I have booking number 12345. I'm having trouble selecting seat 5C. Can you help me out? And a lot of times they will be able to do it right there. And it's, like I said, I've done this at least 5 times, maybe even more. It's really, really successful and pain-free and asynchronous too. So you don't have to sit there on the call. You can send them a DM and then they'll reply back. Really, really helpful tip for me. And number 3 is a book. I'm currently about maybe halfway through the audiobook. It's called Working by Robert Caro. And if you don't know who Robert Caro is, he's a pretty famous reporter, but also biographer. And he's done 2 of my very favorite biographies ever, The Power Broker, which is about Robert Moses, and Path to Power, which is about Lyndon Johnson. And I don't know why I like these things, because I'm not even American, but he's a really, really good writer. He wrote this book called Working, which is basically about how he works. It's not so much an autobiography. It's more like him talking about how he does things. And it's just an interesting insight going into the depths that people who are really, really into their craft. I always like learning about how people do their craft. applies research, interviewing, going like the extra mile that other people don't, and to achieve mastery. And it's a really enjoyable book if you like his books. So it's Working by Robert Caro. And those are my 3 resources.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have links to everything here in our show notes as well. So don't worry if you miss something. And yeah, let's move on to our newsworthy updates here for this episode. So the first industry news that I think a lot of people are going to be enjoying, especially when it comes out later, is so Microsoft is planning to launch a new Outlook version later this year, and it's tentatively called One Outlook. So if you're an Outlook user, especially if you're an Outlook user on multiple platforms, you might have noticed that sometimes the features don't align. Like one feature might be available on Windows, but it might not be available on Mac. So Microsoft is now trying to basically consolidate everything where the look and feel is kind of like the web version of Outlook, and all the features are going to be available on all platforms. So whether it's Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, you don't have to worry about that moving forward. Hopefully down the line, all the features will be available on all different platforms. And the rumored strategy is that also that they want to eventually replace Mail and Calendar with Outlook as well. But the first step is for them to consolidate the feature set. So if you ever use Outlook on different platforms, you know it's kind of a pain, right? Because some features might not be available. So hopefully later this year, it's all going to be streamlined. So look out for that feature update later this year. The second update that's interesting is Todoist, which is a popular Todoist app. They have a new feature called Command. So it's kind of like having a command center where you can navigate around just using keyboard shortcuts or just using keystrokes. So if you use something like Alfred on the Mac, think of it kind of like that, but within the app itself. Or for the smaller segment that is listening, for those who use something like Superhuman, which is an email app where you basically use only keyboards, keystrokes to kind of navigate around. It's kind of like that, but within Todoist. And their goal, or at least their long-term goal, at least with this app feature, is to allow people to use the app without using the mouse whatsoever. And this comes in very handy for people who can't use a mouse, for example, due to a disability. Maybe they broke their mouse or their arm, or they can't see the mouse pointer on the screen, or maybe, you know, they're holding a coffee or a baby or something. Like their goal is to make it accessible enough so that you can navigate around your app just using keystrokes. So that's an important update there as well. Again, Todoist launched this thing called Command. And then the third newsworthy updates is Google releases Chrome OS Flex. So what this does is it allows you to install Chrome OS on Mac and PC hardware. It used to be just limited to whatever hardware Google released, right? So something like a Chromebook, which I think many people are very familiar with. And so with Chrome OS Flex, it's kind of like the cloud's first operating system that's now available to be installed on Mac and PC hardware. So if you have like old computers, you know, that kind of stop working after a while because they get slowed down, they don't get the security patches anymore, and so on, you can kind of breathe in new life by installing something like Chrome OS. And the good thing is it's free. So you're not just limited to Chromebooks anymore. You can actually install it on your own hardware now moving forward. So 3 cool updates there. Curious to hear your thoughts on these, Brooks.
Yeah, you know what the Outlook thing reminds me of a lot is Evernote. Whereas Evernote's strategy used to be, and they would talk about this like very explicitly, one of the knocks against Evernote, but they were like, no, this is the way we choose to do it, is instead of having a consistent interface, they had very different UI, very different features on all of their different platforms. And their reasoning for this was because, hey, we want to take advantage of the different strengths of each platform. Like instead of having it like dumbed down for everything, we want to really play to each platform's strengths and UI. And I think that worked for a while, but I think there's a lot of value in harmonizing everything, even though you don't get things quite as maybe good on each particular one. Like imagine being an IT person. I can't even imagine being a corporate IT person and having to support like all these different versions of Outlook that all of their users are using, whether it's on Mac, Windows, their mobile and stuff like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of value in harmonizing it. The one thing I do worry about though is that Outlook is going to suffer the same thing that Evernote has, which is when they moved to this more harmonized platform, they lost a lot of power user features. They kind of had to sacrifice power user features for consistency. And now they're kind of like adding a bit back. But I worry, like with Outlook, that especially on Windows, there's so many different power user features that a lot of people have been using for, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. I worry that that is going to be a struggle, but I guess we'll have to see how it all plays out. The other thing I want to mention is about Chrome OS Flex. I love this idea. I've received a lot of questions about Chromebooks and Chrome OS for a while. I've always wanted to have a Chromebook, but I've never wanted to buy one for this exact reason, which is I don't want to have yet another piece of hardware sitting around, taking up space in a drawer or whatever. So I've always hesitated to buy one, but I do have old laptops that I just haven't got around to getting rid of. And I'm really excited about this. I actually wanted to install it before recording to play around with it, but I ran out of time. So I'm going to be doing that maybe this weekend. I think this Chrome OS Flex thing is going to be huge. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, actually, behind this computer that I'm using right now, I have a Windows computer that I haven't used in a while. Sometimes I'll use it just to kind of check out some stuff and test stuff, and especially for our courses, like sometimes we have to do some Microsoft testing. So sometimes I'll do that, but I don't really use it that much. And so it'd be fun to kind of maybe have a dual operating system running where I could have Chrome OS on one and Windows on the other. So it'd be interesting to see. And I like the idea of like a cloud first operating system. So the benefits of having something in the cloud is that when you have like software updates, it's kind of like almost instant, right? You don't have to wait for a security patch to download first and then, install it. Like it's kind of like there on demand already. So I think that's a big benefit, but I'll be curious to see what the speed is like as well, especially on older computers like mine. So yeah, if you have some old hardware laying around, like an old Mac or PC, you're not really using it, this I think could be very helpful and very cost efficient as well.
Yeah, we have an internal joke on the team about how old Tan's laptop is, and we're all waiting for the day that we're on some sort of screen sharing call and Carl and his computer just dies. So maybe he'll be joining us from Chrome OS Flex pretty soon. I don't know.
Yeah, for those who are wondering, I still have my MacBook Pro Retina 2013. Like it was, I believe, the first Retina version that they released, and so it's, I want to say, almost 9 years old now, almost a decade now. So it's going strong. It's still doing its thing. I just can't really quite do screen sharing and video calling at the same time. It kind of bogs down now, which didn't happen 6 months ago. But I think once this thing is just hit the ground, I think that's when I'm going to be updating. So hopefully it gives me another 6 months or so. At least let's hit the 10-year mark if we can. All right, let's move over to our industry happening. So we kind of like to kind of navigate the landscape and see what other people are doing when it comes to productivity and tips and strategies and kind of give our take on it. So Brooks, what's the first one that we want to go over?
All right, so I thought this was an interesting question. And the question is, does it make sense to color code your calendar? This is something we've talked about a lot, but does it make sense to do it after the fact? So at the end of the week or the end of the month or whatever period you're talking about, instead of beforehand. And so I started thinking about this because I came across a Twitter thread by Sahil Bloom, who's a VC. He's a VP at a tech investment firm, and he does all these threads on Twitter. Interesting follow. So I followed him for a while. And we've talked about color coding your calendar on the podcast and on the blog for a long time. One of our most popular blog posts actually is about color coding your calendar. And the idea that we've always talked about is using it as a way to time block and segregate the different areas of your life. So maybe you have your planning, your work, your personal, like maybe give those different colors. So it's really easy to see the difference. So that's the way that we've always talked about it. However, this Twitter thread talked about how Sahil, what he does, and I thought it was really, really interesting. And here's what he does. He goes through the week, he has his calendar, he uses his calendar when he goes through the week. But at the end of the week, what he does is he goes back and he color codes his calendar. So, and these aren't like giving it a lot of thought. This is just like your gut instinct, which is usually the correct one. So basically, he looks back at his calendar for the week, and anything where he felt that he was in flow, he colors it green. Anything that he felt he was productive, like he did, productive stuff, he colored it orange. Anything that's kind of like neutral, yellow, and anything that was unproductive, whatever that means to him, your gut instinct, he made it red. And so then what he does is he asks himself, after he's gone and color coded this, he looks back at his calendar and he asks himself, okay, what are the flow state activities? So those green things that I had, what have I been doing that I need to prioritize in the future? The second thing is, what are those time wasting activities? So the red ones that I can delete, and maybe like the orange and the yellow, what are things there that I could delegate or maybe upgrade and make more productive? How could I turn some of that orange time into more green time? And so the ultimate goal, of course, is to have the most hours in green, maybe some hours in orange. You're never going to be in flow state all the time. You delegate those yellows, and then you get rid of the red. So that the perfect week is a 0 red week. Probably not going to happen, but that's the goal. And so I really thought this was I haven't tried this myself, but I really thought this is a really interesting idea, is to use color coding and have a more systematic review so you can really see how you optimize your calendar every single week. What do you think of this, Tan? Do you think it makes sense to color code your calendar after the week happens?
Yeah, when I saw this, I thought it was a very interesting approach. I think if you do this for a few weeks, you probably get a lot of interesting insights from this. And over time, I think you can probably get rid of it as well, where you don't need it. So as someone who's been, doing a weekly review every single week for almost 15 years now, almost, this almost to me comes natural. And this is part of the self-awareness, but also part of my weekly review is I ask myself questions such as, what are some things that I can get rid of on my calendar to free up more time? Like, what are some things that did feel like I was very productive that I can replicate for this upcoming week? Like, I have those kinds of questions in a checklist. And so when I review my week, I kind of have a sense of, okay, this was good, this was not good. Like, I don't have to necessarily color code it. It kind of happens as I'm just reviewing stuff. So in a way, this approach of Sahil is, I think, a little bit more tactical, and especially if you're someone who likes to be more visual with his stuff. Like, I think this is a great approach to say, hey, maybe do it for like a month or so, because then, just like time tracking, you don't want to do it forever, but if you do it for a month, it gives you a lot of interesting insights. Same thing with this. I would say if you want to really get a grip on what your week looks like and where you can spend more time on, color coding, it wouldn't hurt. I think it would make things very easy for you to kind of highlight it.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, we will have a link to that Twitter thread in the show notes, theproductivityshow.com/397, if you want to check it out. But I think I might actually try this, because you did a presentation, and we'll include a link to that as well in the show notes. You did a presentation where you talk about, and spoiler alert, you talk about how a lot of the challenges that we have isn't so much time management. Like, everybody thinks time management is the problem, but really it's more self-management that is the bigger problem. And I think this is, like you said, a really good tactical way to get a handle on that, is know how you're spending your time without the kind of like the pain in the butt aspect of time tracking. And not against time tracking, but it can have a lot of overhead. Whereas I think this is like an 80-20 way to do time tracking and be like, okay, this is big picture, how I spent my time. What are those big rocks I can knock off? So yeah, I like the idea a lot.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. This is like a more effective way of time tracking, because with time tracking, the big hurdle is starting the timer, right? Writing down what you're doing. And then as soon as you stop it. And then you kind of write down, oh, was this good? Was this great? Or was this bad? Whereas if you do it afterwards, it's much easier to kind of get a gauge of what it was like. However, in order to make that work, though, you have to do it every single week. Otherwise, if you're 2 weeks in, you probably don't remember what happened 2 weeks ago during this time slot. So the key, though, is to do it, consistently every single week. And I think that way you kind of have the 80-20, because ultimately you're just looking for, what are some of my productive hours? And if you want to take it even a step further, I would say if you use something like the Rise Signs app, which kind of helps you predict your circadian rhythm. So for those who don't know, everyone has a circadian rhythm. It's like our internal clock, and we go through very predictable patterns throughout the day when we're most alerts and when we have a lull. So typically everyone kind of knows about the quote unquote afternoon lull, and it's a real thing according to certain patterns of our circadian rhythm. Like not everyone has a lull in the afternoon. Like I happen to have one, but some others, like if you tend to wake up a little bit later, you might have a lull later in the day, like in the early evenings or something like that, right? So there's a very predictable pattern. So if you can actually match your pattern of like when you're most alert versus when you're most like unproductive, or you feel like that lull that is very predictable, if you can match those two where you have productive things happening during the times when you're most focused, that takes it even a step further. And I'm a little bit ahead of myself here, but that's something for those who are a little bit more advanced, want to look into your circadian rhythm, tracking it. You'll be surprised what you can pull off. All right, let's move over to the second topic here for today. Brooks, are we talking about capitalism?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we are definitely going in a different direction than a normal episode. We're going to talk. We're going to tackle like a really easy, small topic. The second topic we want to talk about is are capitalism and productivity specifically causing well-being problems for Gen Z? And so again, this is the second of these episodes where I'm going to talk about a TikTok video. I'm going to get a rep as like the TikTok guy, and I don't even really use TikTok, but we came across this Business Insider article, which we will again link to in the show notes, where it talks about this TikTok video that went viral, millions of views. And basically the idea is that the creator of the video said that like many young adults, I used to want an enjoyable and meaningful life. That is until I discovered capitalism. That must have been a bit of a shock. Now I live in a society where my productivity matters more than my well-being. And so I'm just depressed and anxious all the time. I'm smiling, but I'm deeply wounded. I work 3 jobs and I still feel like I'm not doing enough. And I thought that this was an interesting, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this, Tan. I thought this was really, really interesting because this isn't the first time I've come across something like this. And we were actually, just before recording earlier this morning, Tan and I were talking about how there seems to be this trend of not anti-productivity, but realizing that the way people used to think about productivity, which is just like getting more done always, 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 is maybe not all it's cracked up to be. And I'm seeing this with my kids. You know, I have teenage kids. One of them is going to be graduating from high school next year. And it's just so interesting, the differences, because I'm on the older side of things, let's just say. And my generation, when we were coming out of school, like it was just a given, right? You're going to probably come out of school. You're probably going to go to university or college. You are probably going to start at the bottom. You're going to work your way up in some corporation or whatever, and do your time. And then someday you'll retire and blah, blah, blah. And the concept of having to like suffer a little bit for productivity and for your future is just like nobody even really questioned, or very few people questioned it. It's just the way it was. And like the thought of well-being kind of like never really entered our mind. But I think it's very different now. And I'm curious, Tan, what you think of this trend, like almost anti-productivity, or like questioning productivity, maybe is a different way to put it. What do you think of that?
So I came across this article because someone on Slack, as part of our Productivity Academy, we have a private Slack where people can kind of hang out. We have older members there. And one of the members posted this article. And this person said how he or she related to this article very much. And I want to keep this person anonymous because, you know, it's a member and I don't have their consent to necessarily share this. So I wanted to keep it private. But I thought it was very interesting because when I think about the landscape we are in now, especially with all the stuff of like hustling and grinding and like you got to do more, you got to do, you know, you got to sacrifice, right? I think what people are starting to notice, and something you and I have talked about before too, is there's this movement slowly realizing that this is not the life that we want to live, right? And it's one of the reasons I always talk about, like, happy people are productive people, and that's a transformation that I've kind of made over the last few years as well. And if you look at the early days of Asian efficiency, it was actually a very similar mindset. It was very much about, like, how do we do more in less time? How do we, get all this stuff done? Right. And nowadays, if you look at the slogans of the stuff that we put out there, even from this podcast, we open up the show by saying we want to help people get the important things done in the time they have without having to sacrifice the health, family, and things that matter to them. Right. So it's not necessarily about doing more, but it's really about doing the right things in the time available that you have. Right. And sure, there's some things we can do to maximize our time and so on. But it's not necessarily about doing all the time where it starts to hurt your health, your sleep. And on this presentation that I've done before too, like, I show how when I was working and overwhelmed and stressed out, like, I literally gained weight, like 30 pounds in span of like 2 months or something, because it was so stressful. And I think a lot of people are seeing that now too, combined with, when you work from home and stuff. Like, I can't tell from the video if this person was working from home, but there's a lot more anxiety from that situation as well, because a lot of people are not used to that situation, right? So now you're isolated from people as well, and that makes it even tougher for a lot of people. And so I think a lot of people are kind of waking or starting to realize, to say, hey, it's not about working more necessarily. And also, if my company doesn't care about my well-being, like, why would I want to work more? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I've been laid off from jobs multiple times, so I am very familiar with the concept of, when a company is done with you, they're not gonna necessarily show you a lot of love. So, which is not to say you shouldn't show your employer love or dedicate, because I am somebody who thinks that you should do that, but you need to understand that at the end of the day, the person who cares most about your well-being should be and is you, and that's just the way it is. So this is a really interesting trend that we're kind of watching. And it's funny you mentioned the podcast and how it's changed, because I think literally, like, the podcast intro way back in the early episodes, I'd have to go back to listen, but the way I remember it is we used to say, like, literally do more. Like, that was the goal of the podcast. But I think we've really seen this trend shift, and I think it's just going to keep shifting.
Yeah, no, the podcast literally said that too. It's like, do more. Like, when I look back at it now, I go, no, it's not about doing more. And so even if you look at an old Twitter account that we have, I think it's like the Productivity Show, which we don't really use, but even the banner says do more. I just recently came across it. And I realized, like, yeah, we've evolved over the years as well. And so for those who are listening, if you're in this situation where you feel like, whatever you do is never good enough, the best tip I can offer you is to say, hey, before you start your day, ask yourself, like, what's one thing that I can do that would make this a productive day? Or how do I define what a productive day looks like for me? Because if we don't know what that looks like, and we're always moving the goalpost, then you can keep going and going and going, but you never feel satisfied and gratified by what you've accomplished. And so if you say to yourself before you start working, hey, today I'm going to write chapter 1, I'm going to submit my taxes, and after that I'm done, like, that would be considered a good day. And once you hit it, like, you feel really good about yourself and you can move on. Like, sure, there might be other stuff you have to do, but at least you had a productive day. So that's the best thing that I can offer to everyone that's listening that feels like they're in that situation.
Yeah.
All right.
In the live stream. Yeah, in the live stream chat, Kimberly, who's one of our members, says, "For me, it's all about being productive, so I can work fewer hours." And yeah, that's exactly right. It's exactly what you said, Tam. Like, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? And then you can use productivity to get there. So I love that, Kimberly.
Awesome, Kimberly. Keep up the good work. Yeah. Let's move over to the last topic here, and that is topic number 3. So I brought this up because I was recently browsing a forum from Getting Things Done, the GTD method that I'm sure many people are aware of, and they have a public forum. And one person who recently transitioned working from home full time for his company, he asked this question about context. So for those who don't know what contexts are in the GTD method, typically when you have a task, they also encourage you to assign a context with it as well, to say, hey, if you've ever read the book, it will say, oh, is this going to be done on my computer? Is this going to be done at the office? Is this going to be done at home? So you can assign those things to your task and then know, like, okay, if I'm at home, let me pull up all my tasks that are assigned home as my context. Or if I'm at the office, let me pull up all the tasks that I can only do at the office. However, this person has been working from home. So my question that I want to impose here is, and this is the person who asked this as well, is with more people working from home, do GTD contexts still make sense today? Because this person, what he was doing was, okay, he's working from home full time now, and he kind of like updated his GTD workflow to have context called like on computer, right? And that seems to be making sense, right? Because you're working from home, you're probably on your computer. But then he would expand it and say, okay, on computer dash 2 minutes. So he had all these tasks that he could do on his computer in 2 minutes or less, which is the 2 minute rule that many people know of. Then he expanded it and said, okay, I'm going to be quote unquote on computer dash 5 minutes. And then it turned into on computer dash 30 minutes and so on. And then over time, he has this list of contexts and it's all on computer, but just differentiated by how long a task might take. And so I guess just to kick it off here, Brooks, what's your take on context nowadays, especially when people are working from home?
Yeah, I find context less and less useful. I still use a few of them, but it's more action based. Like for me, a context might be phone if I need to phone somebody, or email if I need to email somebody, or that sort of thing. But I can't honestly say that I even use those really. I do it just out of habit, but it's not like I'm doing it like the canonical idea for context that David Allen originally described, where you look at all the things that have the context of phones, so you can sit there and batch and make your phone calls or whatever. I don't even really use it for that. So I think contexts really are less and less useful than they used to be. I know some people do things like use them for priorities or use them for energy levels, like maybe a low energy and a high energy context, and that sort of thing. And if that works for you, great. But I think I would say that if you are finding yourself having to think up ways to use contexts, just for the sake of coming up with clever context, that's probably a sign that they're not as useful for you as you think they will be. So yeah, I would say if you're at home all the time, there's really like less and less reason to use context. But if you are listening to this and you are a big GTD person and a big context person, I would really love to hear some ways that you're using them.
I remember when OmniFocus version 3 came out. This is probably like 2-3 years ago, right? They got rid of context, and it was kind of like an optional thing in a way. And I've realized from using OmniFocus for, I don't know, almost a decade now or something, that over the last few years, I kind of stopped using it too. Because one is, yes, I've been working from home for over a decade now, and I did find it helpful in the beginning, especially as someone who loved the GTD method and used OmniFocus extensively, and even created a course about it. I've tried all sorts of different things, like you mentioned, like priority levels, energy levels, time duration, like this person posted on the forum. And what I find most helpful is there's a few contexts I will still use, but it's all related to people. So I might have a people context where, for example, I might have stuff assigned to you, Brooks, that I need to follow up on, right? And be like, okay, this is really helpful because now I don't have to create a list that is called Brooks or whatever. I can have a context that is assigned Brooks. And so anytime I'm talking to you, I can be like, okay, let me pull up all the things that are related to Brooks and using a context with that. So this is where I find that still helpful. But with places and so on, I kind of realized like, yes, that was nice in the beginning, but nowadays, especially in the last few years when most of us haven't traveled as much, there's less value in that. And so oftentimes now, if you do a good job of keyword filtering, which you can do now with a lot of the views, you can find stuff just using that as well. So I find context less valuable today, and I really don't use them as much, except when it comes to people side of things. The other downside that I want to mention, which this person brought up, is like if you start estimating with minutes in terms of like how long something takes, the problem with that also, and this is a big part of agile principles as well, is as something becomes more complex, it's much harder to estimate how long something takes. So in my experience, if something takes more than 60 minutes, it's very difficult for you as a person to estimate how long it actually is going to take. Like a 60-minute task can kind of be estimated, especially if it's a routine thing you have done before. But if it's a brand new thing, you might estimate it at 60 minutes. Oftentimes you'll find that you're pretty off. And so it's kind of like a losing battle to start estimating based on minutes. So it's something I don't really recommend people do. Like 2 minutes, that's fine. It's a great thing to do, especially with the 2-minute rule. But beyond that, I don't see a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I think the key, and I think you kind of highlighted it there, is if you're going to use contexts or tags, as OmniFocus 3 calls them now, make it so that they're actually doing something for you. So a good example is what you just said, the people one. That's a great example. Giacomo in the chat mentioned that as well. The 2 minutes, like if you follow like the 2-minute rule, well, actually, technically, if you're doing 2 minutes, you shouldn't even be creating a task. You should just do it. But if you're, for maybe a similar example would be if you're somebody who does like the 12-week year and you want to collect tasks to do, say, in a buffer block or something like that, then maybe you would have a buffer context or something like that so that you can easily see the things to do in a buffer block. Like whatever it is, have that as a system that you're actually going to use. If you find yourself giving tags or contexts or whatever, but not actually doing anything with them, that's probably a waste of time, and you might want to simplify your system.
All right, we're coming to the end of the episode here today, so hope you enjoyed it. We definitely like this new format. I don't know about you, Brooks, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, we were talking about beforehand. The one thing we like about it is we literally have no idea what the other person's going to say. So it's always a good time.
But as always, we like to end things with an action item. So my recommendation for you is before you start the next working day, ask yourself, what makes for a productive day? So before you start working, before you start hitting your to-do list, ask yourself, what makes for a productive day today? And if you know how to answer that question, I think you're way ahead, and you're probably going to avoid burnout and feeling like you're never good enough. So I want you to feel achieved at the end of the day. And the way to do that is by simply asking yourself before you start working, what makes for a productive day? Next week, we're going to be talking about spring cleaning your schedule and workflow. So as spring is coming back around, we're excited to kind of like re-jumpstart things as we do things here at AE. So be sure to check back next week. And everything that we talked about today can be found in the show notes. You can go to theproductivityshow.com/397. If you made it this far, you enjoyed it, let us know. Definitely leave a review on iTunes and Spotify as well. We would love that and very much appreciate it. And thanks again, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.